You spoke about international law. We are now at an international forum. This is a rules-based forum for the whole world. Naturally, international cooperation is based on respect for sovereignty. The President of Russia compared the special military operation with what Peter the Great did during the Great Northern War. That is, this is the territory that is returned to Russia by right. Don't you think that this is a violation of international law? You are showing a marvelous example of your propaganda work. Please tell me, have you ever tried with the same pathos to ask the U.S. Secretary of State or the U.S. President a question about recognizing the alleged sovereignty of Kosovo, for example? Also, with pathos, you go to a briefing at the State Department or the White House and, just as beautifully and juicy, say that we, the United States, are holding forums that are based on international law and on international norms that imply respect for the borders of sovereign states. On what basis did we, the United States, covering up the heinous crimes in Kosovo for many years, including trafficking in internal organs, finally awarded, if I may say so, these bandits who were outrageous there with the title of a sovereign state, contrary to the resolution of the UN Security Council, and contrary to the will of Belgrade and the people of Serbia, without asking either one or the other, no one. On what basis? When will you start talking like this with your leaders and with your officials? Or do you only address these questions to us, and everything is fine with international law? We defend it and defended it as we can. In practice, contrary to the intentions of the United States, we will implement it. I can answer you, no problem. Let's look at 2014. There was a referendum in the Crimea. It took place against the backdrop of an anti-constitutional coup. There was a legally elected President Viktor Yanukovych, who, regardless of how he was treated, was recognized by the Western community. He was the best friend of the West until the end of 2013, until he suddenly asked the question, what should he do with the two integration associations in which he already participates in the CIS, and with those who invite him to the European Union? He asked for a delay of several months in order to harmonize these processes. The next day he woke up, being a criminal objectionable to the West. Everyone from the EU stopped communicating with him. Although, a week before, he was the main guest at the next forum of the European Union. You see, he was terribly and bloodily dismissed, with victims on the Maidan, with the use of militants, with American money, with the political support of the European Union. Your government did all this manually. The high-ranking representative of the U.S. State Department personally participated in these events, not only infiltrating the internal affairs of Ukraine, but she, with the support of the militants, personally led the political processes that were brewing there. They removed Yanukovych. The regions that you care so much about, those territories of Ukraine, where the legally elected power of the people, democratically elected, remained. They did not swear allegiance to the so-called government that came to power as a result of this coup. They decided to keep this lawful and internationally recognized power and not to submit to these rabid imposters. They began to defend this people's power, and they fully received the support of the people. Crimea held a referendum. It was a bold attempt to have this referendum, as these referendums have always been blocked. They held a referendum, and Russia supported them in this decision. And Donetsk and Lugansk also held a referendum. And let's call a spade a spade. These people gave the Western community the opportunity to prove themselves on the negotiating track in order to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine, in order to preserve the state of Ukraine itself. We proposed the first Minsk package of measures, And we just took note of the decision of that referendum. And together with the Western community represented by Berlin and Paris, we began to work on the negotiation track. For 8 years we endured this disgrace. For 8 years people have been killed there. For 8 years we have observed, and in recent years we have recorded, how the armed forces of all stripes are building up there under the cover of the armed forces of Ukraine. And then, after that, there were murders of civilians and volunteers, and people who were in the resistance, whom you called separatists, who signed the Minsk agreements, in which it was written that the DPR and LPR are part of Ukraine. But still, you kept calling them separatists. Why? They just wanted and tried to live inside Ukraine, but you still poked at them, that they were separatists. Even after those murders went over 13,000. This is not just fighting. These are mass graves, these are the murders of children, and so on. And, most importantly, it is a sinusoid rising into the sky, an increase in the number of NATO military exercises in the Black Sea. Last year alone there were 7, and next year there should be 9. The number of military units participating from NATO has also increased many times over. These are weapons, instructors, and military personnel of the armies of NATO countries. We knew what this situation would lead to. After that, we recognized the obvious thing. We recognized the declared independence of the DPR and LPR in order to stop the flow of deaths and guarantee their safety at their own request. What are you talking about? Show me where this international law was not respected by us. The references to the UN Charter that we made, they are the same as the representatives of the NATO and EU community did when they carried out some of their operations. Show me where the logical chain is broken by us. Now there are deliveries of weapons, including Soviet ones, to the territory of Ukraine. This completely violates all the obligations assumed by the Western countries, which are stimulated by these deliveries. Today I publish the relevant material in my Telegram channel. Just read it. But you are not interested in all this. What about everything else that's going on there? Therefore, you say this path is for American politicians and government officials. And ask these questions to future U.S. presidential candidates, future congressional nominees. Demand an account from them in the same way as now.
That doesn't really answer the
Actually, you didn't answer my question. I want to remind you that the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was widely covered in the media in the United States. The question is that in this idea, to regain the lands and strengthen them, is this not a violation of international law? I understand that now the topic called "This is different" will begin again. What was the legal basis for the invasion of Iraq? It was? I didn't talk about Iraq, you said it. Was there any legal basis for the invasion of Iraq? Tell me about the invasion of Iraq. Lost translation?
We're not talking about Iraq now.
We are not talking about Iraq.
International.
What's the difference now? You are now invading the sovereignty of another country. Do you understand what a referendum is?
Has there been a referendum in?
Has been a referendum? The referendum was in Donetsk and Lugansk. You just forgot about it. That has not been recognized. Ah, that's it. So for you it is important, not what is the will of the people, but who recognized or did not recognize. Am I understanding your logic correctly?
I mean, obviously, countries have to recognize. That's why the United Nations was founded.
That is why the UN was created to recognize or not recognize certain referendums. You say that we seized territories and annexed them to ourselves. What areas are you talking about? These are the territories around the Sea of Azov, Kiev, Lugansk, Donetsk, Kherson region and other regions. Lots of. These are the territories of Donetsk and Lugansk. It is not only them, as you know very well, but also Kiev, Odessa and many other regions. Yes, this is Donetsk and Lugansk region. Now we are returning to the fact that these are the territories of Donetsk and Luhansk, which we have recognized as sovereign states. We recognize them as sovereign states. There were referendums, as I said, which reflected the will of the people. We took it into account. And then we launched a negotiation process on the reintegration of these regions under Ukrainian statehood. And we've been doing this for 8 years. These 8 years of negotiations went on for a reason. They did not start from the prosperous life of Ukraine. They began due to the fact that, due to an anti-constitutional coup, Ukraine began to disintegrate into various parts. One of these parts held a referendum, which we both recognized and reunited with this territory. This is Crimea. And the other parts are Donetsk and Lugansk. They held these referendums. The people said their word. But we have given an opportunity to launch the negotiation process by Western countries regarding the reintegration of these regions into the common territory of Ukraine. Don't you know this? You didn't know what those negotiations were about for 8 years? Are you just now approaching this topic? Well, after all, these negotiations were conducted about something for 8 years. What were these negotiations about? These negotiations were about how to restart the life of Ukraine, taking into account the interests and rights of these territories, the DNR and LNR, Donbass. Unfortunately, over the course of 8 years, these negotiations came to a standstill because of the position of, not even the Kiev regime, but because of the position of Washington, which stood behind the Kiev regime. And all this ended with the fact that over the past year and a half, representatives of Kiev, the president of this country, representatives of ministries and departments, said that the Minsk agreements are no longer valid. They do not correspond to the situation on earth, and these officials will no longer be themselves feel obligated, especially since they were not the ones who signed them. Moreover, they were signed in circumstances that no longer exist. The Kiev authorities have completed this negotiation process. You have to force yourself to somehow make sense of the facts. What was the negotiation process about? It's difficult, I understand, when you don't speak cliches. But when you are based on facts, then this is a rather difficult process. But it is. I mean that the negotiation process was about the reintegration of Donetsk and Luhansk on certain conditions. The Kiev regime and Donetsk and Lugansk agreed with this. And the members of the Normandy format have undertaken the corresponding work to facilitate this process. And these negotiations were not about improving the economic conditions of life in Donetsk or Lugansk. These negotiations were not about the humanitarian component of Donbass. These negotiations were about how these territories would be reintegrated into the territory of Ukraine. Whether this will work or not depends on the participants in the process. It didn't work out. The reason for this is the Kiev regime, backed by Washington. And now there is no need to pretend that this did not happen and that the story began only in 2022. It's a long story that has its own logic. You just spoke about the United Nations, which was created on certain principles.
ну вот, я не знаю, если вот не кто еще, наверное, а кто из стран коллективного Запада в своей политике
And which of the countries of the collective West in their policy really expressed respect for the fundamental principles of the United Nations? You forgive me. You say you don't need to tell you about Iraq. Why shouldn't we tell you about Iraq? We need to tell you about Iraq. These were the countries of the coalition, with rare exceptions of the same France and Germany. Basically, these were NATO member countries and not only. It was also Ukraine. Few people remember this now. But Ukraine also joined the invasion and destruction of a sovereign state. Maybe there we will look for the beginning of the path of disrespect for the UN and its charter, its fundamental principles. That's why you don't like it when we tell you about Iraq. But it started with you. Maybe let's remember about Libya? Why are you laughing? You don't like it? Are you feeling uncomfortable?
About Libya, we can
Когда мы говорим, мы можем говорить
We can
о
talk about
Ливии,
Libya and
Афганистане,
Afghanistan.
но сейчас происходит
But now there is an
вторжение
invasion
в
of
Украину.
Ukraine.
Поэтому
Therefore,
я
I
предлагаю
propose to
поговорить
talk
о
about
Украине.
Ukraine.
Вы представляете Министерство иностранных дел
You
Украины.
represent the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia.
Давайте говорить об Украине.
Let's talk about Ukraine.
И правительство
The government of
хотели
Ukraine wanted to restore the Minsk agreements and abide by them.
Когда вы говорите о Донецке
When you talk
и
about Donetsk and
Луганске,
Lugansk,
я не уверен, что
I'm not sure
нападение на Харьков может
that the attack on
оправдываться
Kharkiv can be justified by the liberation of the DNR and LNR.
Это новая мантра
This is a new mantra.
того, что происходит в Украине.
What is happening in Ukraine?
В Украине происходит
In Ukraine,
захват
there is a seizure of lands
которые
that were
считались
considered
законно.
primordially Russian.
Что это
What does it
значит?
mean?
Где это
Where does it
заканчивается?
end?
Не является ли
Is
это
this not a
нарушением
violation of international law, which was
права,
established after
которое
the
было
Second World
установлено
War?
после Второй мировой войны?
You say that I do not answer your question. You don't like the way I answer it. But I answer. It is possible that this does not coincide with your vision of my answer, but this does not mean that I do not give this answer. Once again, we can walk through the fundamental principles with you. International law is not a buffet from which you can choose only what you like and want. International law implies rights and obligations for everyone without exception. If one of the largest countries in the world has declared that it considers itself exclusive and it is not going to obey international law, why do you demand from everyone else that they accept this situation as it is? It was America that said it was exceptional. It was America that said it was exceptional. And we said that this is a wrong concept and no one has the right to exclude himself from international law. And at the same time, we noted that the United States of America and the NATO group are trying to destroy the international legal system. Doing this in practice and theory. We have given a number of examples that clearly prove this. And we said that in such a situation, international law can simply cease to exist because it is being attacked. And specific examples of these attacks are the bombing of Belgrade, the capture of Iraq, the destruction of Libya. You don't want to talk about it. But I will tell you that American troops are now in Syria. You be concerned about it. What are American troops doing in Syria? Nobody called them there, neither the individual regions of this country, nor the government in Damascus, nor civil society. But American troops are present there. You ask yourself a question. Do you comply with international law? And then the United States has the right to demand an answer to this question from others. Or do you treat international law as a tool for pursuing your own policy?
So that means that you acknowledge that you're disobeying international law. Is that what you're
То есть вы признаете нарушение международного права?
считать себя вправе,
And then you consider
давать
yourself entitled to
моральные
give moral
оценки
assessments to
всем
everyone
остальным.
else?
На вопрос, что американские
When
войска
asked what American
делают в
troops are doing in
Ираке,
Iraq,
ответ только один.
there is only one answer.
Пытаются забрать
They are trying to
ресурсы,
take away
которые
resources that
принадлежат
belong to the
сирийскому
Syrian people
народу и очень нужны
and which the United
Соединенным
States of
Штатам
America badly
Америки.
needs.
Вы меня
You ask me
спрашиваете
about what is
относительно
happening in
того, что
Donetsk,
происходит
in
в
Lugansk,
Донецке,
on the territory of
Луганске,
Ukraine.
Белгороде.
I have explained to you.
Мы после того, как 8 лет
For 8 years,
из-за
due to the
позиции
position of the
киевского
Kiev regime,
эти переговоры не дали
the
конкретного
negotiations did
результата
not
о
give a concrete result on the political
политическом
resolution of the
разрешении
conflict,
конфликта, который образовался в результате
which was formed as a result of the coup d'etat in 2014.
К сожалению,
Unfortunately,
очевиден
the crisis was
кризис,
obvious,
который
which resulted in the
вылился в том,
fact
что Донецк и
that
Луганск
Donetsk and
заявили
Lugansk declared
о том, что они
that they were
являются
sovereign
суверенными
territories.
территориями.
The Russian
Российская
Federation
Федерация,
took into account the fact
то, что на протяжении многих лет, 8 лет,
that for
там
8 years
шла
there was a bloody
кровавая
massacre,
война и убивали
civilians
гражданское
were killed
население,
there,
и целое поколение
a whole
детей
generation of
выросло
children
просто
grew
в
up in
подвалах.
basements.
Слава богу, вам это не
Thank God you
понять.
don't get it.
Приняла решение о признании
Russia has
этих
decided to
суверенных
recognize
территорий
these
в
sovereign
качестве суверенных.
territories.
Приняла
Russia received the
послов этих
ambassadors of these
государств
states
и начала оказывать ту помощь,
and began to
которой
provide the
эти
assistance that
территории,
these
эти государства
territories,
у нас
these states requested
запросили.
from us.
При этом
At the same
Запад
time, the
начал
West began to
раздувать
inflate
этот
this conflict,
поставляя все больше и
supplying
больше
more and more
вооружений
weapons,
и нацеливая киевский режим на
and
то, чтобы
directing the Kiev
его
regime to
руками
wage war with
вести
us
с
with
нами
its
войну.
hands. I don't know how else to explain to you.
Если вы не понимаете,
If you
вы
do not
прям детально
understand,
скажите, что конкретно
then
вы не
directly say what
понимаете.
exactly you do not understand.
Да, но я готова на интервью. Нет, уже вас уже я дам потом вам. Я
I'll
дам
give
вам
you the
возможность
opportunity
потом
to ask a
задать
question
вопрос.
later.
Я дам. Вы меня слышите?
Can you hear me? These are serious guys. These are Russian journalists. Be careful with them.
Да, пожалуйста.
Yes, please. Dear Maria Vladimirovna, thank you very much for your professional responses. I am the editor-in-chief of the Society and Ecology newspaper, which has been published in St. Petersburg for 23 years, and I am also the chairman of the Union of Donbass residents under St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region. I was there often in the Donbass. So, now our friend from the United States of America has the opportunity to speak directly with a person who, with facts from the field, will tell you what is happening in the Donbass. He will just tell you now. Quite right. Thanks a lot to Sergei Lavrov for his clear civic position. And I recommend to a colleague from CNN to go to Lugansk and Donetsk and talk to ordinary people there so that you don't ask Maria Vladimirovna the wrong questions, but talk to the people there. I will tell you, CNN cannot afford it because CNN's office is in the United States of America. They will never be sent there because then they will have to tell the truth. Now you are the representative of this region. Are you from there? You are not a resident of Moscow and St. Petersburg. I personally give you permission. You can say, I order you to interview the representative of Donbass, who is in this building and is your journalist colleague. Start with him. Talk to him. You will never be allowed to show this material. You know this better than me. And you know it. And these materials will never appear on CNN. Because then the so-called contract demonstrators will start walking around CNN headquarters. And your bosses will start canceling you just like they cancel all those who show the truth. I tell you again, what permission do you need to interview a person who came from Donbass? You don't need any permission. I gave you permission. He too. Talk to him. He will tell you the truth. After all, you love to show ordinary people from some region in the frame, right? You so like to show the concrete life of a simple citizen of Ukraine. Here's a simple resident of Donbass. And he is your colleague. Talk to him.
Dear friends, if you like this video, please subscribe, like and write a comment. This will greatly help the development of this channel. Thank you.